Friday morning on KCMO. The rain is falling at Corporate Woods. It's our featured Friday segment, and we are happy to welcome in the studio and say hello to somebody who really needs no introduction, unless you're not looking at his face because he's on the radio. Kris Ketz, Channel 9 KMBC anchor. Good morning, Kris.
Pete, good morning. I've never been in this building, and you guys have some really nice digs.
Well, everybody says that.
Really? I mean, I have some experience with the radio chain across the street.
Yes.
And their digs are dirt compared to
that you are right about that.
I'm just saying. I mean, yeah, this is pretty sweet.
This is cream of the crop right here. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you coming in and being here. And listen, these Friday segments are fun. You know, we get to learn more about people that folks see in town.
I got to tell you something. So,
yes.
So, spirit of full disclosure. So, Pete, he didn't have my cell number, okay, when he originally reached out, and he DM'd me on X. And the problem with me is on my phone, I don't have notifications turned on X. So, if you DM me on X, chances are I may not see it for a day or two. And poor Pete DMs me, and I didn't pick it up until like the next day or something, and it was too late. And I as soon as I saw it, I wrote you right back. I gave you my cell number, and my email, and I said, hit me there. Don't. And I'm thinking to myself, but as soon as I saw it and saw how late I was, I'm thinking, boy, Pete must really be Pete.
Oh,
no.
No.
Who is this? That I didn't get back to you right away. So I apologize on the air, on the record, for not getting back to you, and that will never happen again.
Are you kidding me? You get back to me still faster than my wife does on text messages. So that was not even crossing my mind. I really
felt bad though.
I hit you up at like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. I'm like, he's actually preparing for a newscast. I'm guessing I'm low on the food chain here. No. I thought about. Listen, we've had on a lot of your. I guess you would call them competitors.
John Holt says hi, by the way. I was with John for briefly last night.
But you guys are all buddies.
You know what? If it wasn't raining, John Holt and I would be playing golf right now.
Is that right?
Yes. Now, we're both not very good.
Well.
And John would tell you that.
That's okay.
But we have fun. But, yeah, the fact that it's raining, this works out just fine.
So how much competition is there then between, you guys? You're golfing, but you're also competing every night.
Tremendous competition. But, whether it's John or Kevin Holmes over at 41 or Brad and Carolyn over at 5 this is a market where the main anchors have a tremendous amount of respect for each other.
Mm-hmm.
If for no other reason, we're all fighting the same battles.
Yes.
And we understand that, and we're sympathetic about that. And as I say, this is, we're slugging it out with everybody else every night.
Mm-hmm.
And, and now my oldest son, Jonathan, who for the last couple of years it's so great that we have him, he and his lovely wife, Beth, and my 3 amazing grandchildren, soon to be a 4th in late July.
Do they have a 4th on the way? I got to get Jonathan. I got to text him about
that. But now that they're here, it's funny because, I watched Jonathan. Jonathan's been in the business now. His first job out of the University of Missouri School of Journalism, which is, by the way, the world's finest school of journalism. If you don't believe him, just ask him; they'll tell you. But John's first job out of the box was at my father's television station up at the Quad Cities, where he was a legend. And so my son walks in. His first job out of Mizzou, walks into a building where the street in front of the station and the studio are named after his grandfather. So there was no pressure whatsoever.
That's impossible.
And he spent 9 years there anchoring mornings and loved it, and they were wonderful to him. But he always wanted to come home. And Jonathan is a proud graduate of Oak Park and, of course, Mizzou. And so now he's here. And what's kind of interesting about Jonathan is he has no interest whatsoever to be an anchor. None.
Really?
It's a kid who, obviously grew up in the business. He's 3rd generation. He has absolutely no interest whatsoever to sit behind a desk and read a prompter. He wants to be a reporter that badly. Which I've spent years trying to screw up my kids, and they still turned out well.
Here's the thing. I thought everybody who got on TV and started as a reporter wanted to be an anchor.
No.
That's where you're the big rock star and you make the money and all that.
And even me, I mean, back in the day when I got my first weeknight anchor job here at KMBC, I had been here 11 years, and I was on no anchor track whatsoever. None.
Now, what does that mean, no anchor track? You weren't doing any weekends, fill-ins?
Okay. I might fill in every once in a while, but it wasn't anything that was on a regular basis.
Okay.
And my bosses at the time, Brian Bracco and Dino Dinovitz, and God only knows what the hell they were thinking about when they made that decision, but they thought I might be a pretty good match with Kelly Ackerman at 5 o'clock. And, the rest is history. But getting back, Jonathan, for just a second, it's funny now because, I'll watch their 4 o'clock because I'm not on until 5. And so Jonathan did what I thought was a really solid job covering the Jackson County Stadium sales tax vote. He did a great job.
He led the way with that.
He really did. He really did a good job. And so I'm sitting in our newsroom watching his stuff, and I'm kind of, why don't we have that piece? Yelling, looking at my son's work. And there's a part of me that's like that, and then there's also a part of me that's like, yeah, that's my kid.
Yeah. No, and you're right. He led the way, and I will say
he did a great job.
I tried to get him on the show a lot, and the bosses wouldn't allow it, but he was leading the way.
They have a new news director coming, so that may change.
That would be great.
I think he'd love to do it.
And I know it's only good exposure for all of us when you cross different sectors of media. So let's go back for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned you get here 41 years ago now.
It was the 4th of July, 1983, is when I walked into the when I walked into our old building at 11th and Central in the Lyric Theater.
And you had left your father's station up at the Quad Cities.
I'd been in television for a year and a half. I was in radio for 5 years before that, working my way through St. Ambrose University in Davenport, Iowa.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Good Jesuit school.
What made you say to yourself, I want to leave? I'm sitting here under, of course, this legendary station my father's built, but it's time for me to go to Kansas City.
I always knew that I am the first one to admit that being my father's son up in the Quad Cities, and for those who don't know, his air name was Jim King, very well known up in the Quad Cities. But his real name was Ketz, but they made him change it, eons ago because for whatever reason, it was at the ABC station in Omaha. This was 1957-ish, and he was doing sports. And for whatever reason, the management up there, ironically, it's now her station. It's one of ours. But back then, they made him change it because they thought Ketz, K-E-T-Z, Ketz, which is German, they thought it was too ethnic.
I was going to say, it's not super ethnic. It's not like Mundo or
but
something.
And when I got into radio, I was a senior in high school at the time and reading weekend news at a 1,000-watt radio station in Moline, Illinois. But a 1,000-watt radio station in Moline, Illinois that had just won a National Headliners Award. It was a 6-person newsroom, and I probably learned way more by working with those people than I did at school or pretty much anything else.
Yeah.
I learned under some phenomenal people. But so I walk into the building at KMBC on the 4th of July, 1983. And it didn't take me long. I was 3? It didn't take me long to figure out, man, I'm in way over my head. Okay, I get this job as a reporter, and what happened was the news director up in the Quad Cities came to KMBC months later, brought me with, and we weren't getting along at the time, so that was really kind of a shock to me that we weren't speaking to each other. Okay, up in Moline, so he comes here, brings me with, and I walk into the building, and I had enough time to shake hands with the assignment editor on the 4th of July. And they send me right out the door. They want to. At the time, the governor of Kansas was John Carlin, and apparently there was some sort of controversy at the time involving his wife and a pool that was built at Cedar Crest in Topeka. And anyway, so they said, "Go find the governor on the 4th of July." Now I knew who the governor of the state of Kansas was at the time. I had no idea what he looked like. He could have been sitting next to me.
Can't Google image that.
No, you can't Google image that. So thank goodness I was working with one of the best photojournalists in the country, period, a guy named Tim Twyman, who still works for us kind of part-time. His son works for us full-time. And Turner's damn near as good as his dad, which is scary good.
Wow.
But Tim, between Tim and I, we figured out where Carlin was, found him. He was gracious enough to do an interview, and then we went over to Cedar Crest. We recorded some video and came back. We actually filed a piece for 10 o'clock that night.
Wow.
And how we did that, I don't know. But it didn't take me long to figure out. I was in a room. I had no business being in Kansas City. Coming from market, at the time, the Quad Cities, I think, was 75 or 80, and at the time, Kansas City was, 26 or 7. I had no business being in this newsroom. None. But I've always given myself credit for this. I was at least smart enough to know that I'm sitting in a newsroom, and some of these names, these names will resonate with, I think, many of your folks in the audience. To my right, the late, great Edward Lewis. To my left, Michael Mahoney, who, for my money, it's as good as it gets. Next to him, Bob Worley. A couple of months later, Bev Chapman, who, if I die and go to heaven tomorrow, if I could be half as good a writer as she is, that's it. And then Peggy Bright behind her. I was smart enough to know that if I just kept my mouth shut and watched how these people work, especially Mahoney, especially Bev, especially Peggy, if I just kept my mouth shut and watched how these people work, I might learn something. And I mean, at the time, it was even money that I'd last a year. It really was. But Mahoney in particular.
Yeah. Mike's great. We love Mike.
Listening to, watching him work, listening to him talk to sources on the phone. It was, if I hadn't done what I did at the time, like I say, there's no way I'd have survived. No way.
Kris Ketz is in the studio. We saw Mahoney. Mark and I saw Mahoney last night at our Politics in a Pint with Jay Ashcroft. He was outstanding. It's always good to see Mike. So, Kris, career-wise, I want to go to your first Emmy, 1991.
Yeah.
Your in-depth report on the influence of the KKK in the Kansas City area. What is that story?
Again, this is for longtime listeners of this radio station, of which there are many. I know that. You will remember in the early 90s that there was a resurgence of the Klan and Klan activity in Kansas City. They had their own show on public access on cable. They only ended up producing like 2 or 3 shows, but they were on.
Yeah.
Okay. They had established a beachhead. Okay. And of course, there was great controversy throughout the city. There were hearings at City Hall. I mean, it was a thing. So the story was that it turned out the head of security for the local Klan group in Kansas City, which was kind of based out of a guy's basement up in Platte City, the head of security for the Klan was actually a paid informant for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms.
Wow.
And so I got to know this guy early on in this story, understood his connection with law enforcement, but he was still being an informant to federal law enforcement as we were meeting. So I really couldn't do anything until he came out. And once he came out, it turned out to be a pretty good story. I mean, I think Kansas Cityans got a much deeper sense of what federal law enforcement knew about these guys and why they, we had video of these guys, firing weapons, and they were, burning crosses and stuff like that. But people got a much better understanding of why these guys are so dangerous. Okay. But as I say, we were in contact with each other for the better part of a year.
Wow.
And we would meet at least a couple of times a month. Okay. And just to kind of, for me, to get an update on where he was in their investigation, maybe a timeline as to, when his work for ATF would be over and he would be able to come out. And we would meet. I've been to some of the diviest bars in Kansas City.
Well, now I gotta go,
because he was of course he was afraid of being trailed, and I was concerned about being trailed as well. We didn't know who knew.
Yeah.
Okay. We knew federal law enforcement knew. We were with sources who were helping us with this along the way, but we met in some of the diviest bars in town.
You been back since to any of them?
No. But as I say, when he came out, it was a pretty good story, and that was my that was my first Emmy for investigative reporting.
Wow.
Was that story?
Well, let's fast forward 12 years, May 4th, 2003.
Yeah.
The biggest story of your career, or at least most personal story of your
most
career.
Most impactful for me. For those who don't know, I lost a house and almost a family to an F4 tornado. We had built a house a year earlier up in the Carriage Hill Estates area of Kansas City North. And again, for longtime listeners, May 4th, 2003, you remember the day. It was a tornado that started out by what was then the Woodlands in western Wyandotte County, and it jumped the river and went through, the Northland and ultimately hit my house and so many others. I was with my then father-in-law at his house 3 blocks away on the Gladstone side of Carriage Hill Estates, and it hit his house first. And we had 12 people in our house when it hit. We were doing a birthday party for him and me at the time.
Wow.
And we were short on steak knives, of all things. And so he and I went to his house to get steak knives. And I will never forget this moment as long as I live. So there's tremendous wind and rain, and I mean,
you're driving through it to get steak knives?
I had gotten back into my SUV. He's trying to lock the front door of his house. I'm inside the SUV, and all this weather is happening around us. And I'll never forget this moment as long as I live. I'll go to my grave with this image. I looked to my right, which was west, on what is Northeast 64th Street on the Gladstone side. And literally half a block, there was this huge charcoal gray wall. And our tornado was not this sort of well-defined funnel. I mean, the base of this thing was pretty good size. And I saw this charcoal gray wall, and it's hard to explain, but something told me it's here. Okay? It's the real deal. And so I looked at my then father-in-law. He looked at me. He unlocked the door. We went inside, hit the basement, and within seconds, the tornado hit. Now, his part of the neighborhood took a hit. His house took a little bit of a hit. Not bad, but there were some houses that, like I say, there was some damage there. But for the most part, everything was still standing within from what I could see in this sort of half-block area. And so, and the tornado lasted probably 35, 40 seconds, okay? And so we came up from the basement, looked around, and as I say, there was damage, but this isn't bad. It could have been a lot worse. I'm getting on, so I get on my cell phone. I'm trying to call home. The cell towers are down. I can't make connection, but I'm not thinking much of it because everything I see around me, okay, yeah, we took a hit, but could have been worse. Like the first call, I was actually able to make a phone call to the station. We were in live coverage at the time, and I actually did a report saying, it just hit here. I can't tell you much beyond what I'm seeing, but I can tell you what I'm seeing. So several minutes go by, and one of the people at our party comes running up the street, and the street was blocked because there were mature trees in the street. I mean, there was enough wind to do that kind of damage. And one of the people at our party came running up the street, and again, I'm thinking the whole neighborhood looks like this. You go a half block in any direction, and it's just devastation, but I didn't know that at the time. Guy comes running up, and all he says is this: everybody's okay, but your house is gone.
Wow. And
so at that point, I start running. So I go up Northeast 64th, turn left, pop the hill, and then it hits me. Okay? How we walked away, everybody in our neighborhood survived, okay? But how we all walked away from an F4 tornado, and the Fujita scale at the time, an F4 was winds between 205 and 250. I mean, this was a big dog. Not a lot of people walk away from an F4. Yeah. Somehow, some way we did. And, it's funny because the anniversary was just, a couple of weeks ago. And I had just finished playing golf, and it was like 6:30 in the evening. And I'm sitting down to have a beer. And I'm looking at my watch at 6:30, and it suddenly hit me where I was at that moment in 2003, 21 years earlier. I'm walking around in a daze.
Wow.
And I hadn't had that, and it really kind of shook me a little bit. I haven't had a moment like that in a long time. Now, it's changed the way I cover tornadoes. I was in Joplin that night, Jeff City. I've covered tornadoes since then. And the one thing that I have always done, for the people who have been nice enough to share their stories with me, I have always taken them aside and said to them, it's going to be okay. Because I wish somebody had told me that night. It's going to be okay. It's not going to be tomorrow. It's not going to be next week. It's not going to be next month. But eventually, you're going to be okay.
What a great way to end it. Great story. Kris Ketz, Channel 9 KMBC. I've got a million more questions for you, so you're going to have to come back.
All right.
Deal?
Okay, done.
All right. I like it. Kris Ketz on KCMO Talk Radio.